feel very sorry for him. I do, because he seems like a nice enough guy, but it's always a shame when things like this don't work out.
And Baxty, to that point, sir, we know where nice guys finish, particularly in F1.
But on Oscar, what I would say is he is doing currently what all the really, really great drivers do, which is when the car comes good, they make really, really good use of it.
86.72 seconds was the pole at the British Grand Prix. Lewis was as near as makes no difference, half a second away. So that half a second translates into 0.58%. So at the Austrian Grand Prix, one race ago, no less, 64.391 was what got pole Max Verstappen. Lewis Hamilton was 0.428 seconds adrift. That's 0.66%. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Shakedown. With me, as always, my co-host, my right honourable colleagues, my friends, my brothers, Shez and Baxty. How are we doing, chaps?
Yeah, all right. Thanks.
Yeah, we did good, mate. Yeah.
It doesn't matter
How are you?
how you're doing.
Okay.
It's weird, right? It feels a bit oxymoronic saying those words in that tone of voice. But you know what? We'll go with it, lads. Lads, there's been breaking news in the F1 space. The midweek news beat has just kicked off on this Tuesday, the 11th of July. Techie, eh? Techie. I had to check the date. Does anyone even keep track of what date it is? I barely know what date it is anymore just because of work. Go on then. Nyck de Vries, chaps, is no longer. He's a goner. I feel sad saying that. It just feels like, the humanity. The F1 space is very cutthroat, isn't it? Gone with immediate effect to be replaced by Danny Rick, the Honey Badger, at the next Grand Prix, at the Hungaroring, the Hungarian Grand Prix. Shez, I'm going to throw to you first, sir. How did you react to this news, mate?
First of all, I'm really sorry, Nick. I'm sorry you're not in the AlphaTauri seat anymore. It's a shame, but I have to say, fairly expected. And all in all, I think it's probably the right call for the Red Bull family.
Why, Shez? That just sounds like wickedness to me, mate.
Yeah,
why do you think it's the right call?
So look, my sort of fundamental feeling about the Nyck de Vries news is, it's the mistake here isn't chucking him out mid-season. The mistake was putting him in the seat in the first place.
How dare you, Shez? How very dare you?
If we think about sort of why that actually happened, Nick was a Mercedes driver. 28 years old, won some titles, big titles. Let's not get it twisted. Big titles with Mercedes, but he hadn't done huge mileage in a Formula One car, and his big debut was in a Williams that was going to perform pretty well in Monza, and it just seemed to coincide with a time when Red Bull had no alternatives for that seat, and they needed someone. Daniel Ricciardo wasn't available to them at the time, and Nick seemed like a good shout. But if you think about it, there were some other alternatives. Why was Mick Schumacher not put in that seat? Now that would have been
because he stacked it in Monaco in front of the eyes of the world, right? Crashed it in the worst places, the most visible ones at the wrong times. Shez,
yeah,
no?
But Cameron, he was starting to come. He was actually coming good towards the back end of that season, and you know that he has experience in a Formula One car. What they've done instead is, on the back of one race, put Nyck de Vries in, who, the way I saw it, was a 28-year-old rookie in F1 when your two-time world champion is 25 years old. You know, you're putting in someone that has no experience in Formula One, has not been put in a Formula One car by the team that he was being looked after, Mercedes, and now you're hoping that he's gonna come along and be the answer to your vacant seat. he was always going to be a placeholder for me, and it would have been a surprise if he'd outperformed Yuki Tsunoda. But the fact that he's underperformed as badly as he has, I think leaves them in a position where this was always a possibility, and Daniel Ricciardo has given them a reason to chuck him out of his seat. That's how I've seen it, and I can't argue with that.
Shez, that's so techie. You know, I've clocked as we grow, get to know and love you, Shez. You know, I've clocked your tone is so endearing, but your words cut like a knife.
Lethal,
You are like very matter of fact, like brutally so. Especially when it comes to NDV. Oh, mate, let's go. Baxty, talk to me, bro. How did he react to the news?
I was quite shocked. I thought if they were going to do it, they would do it during the summer break. Because obviously there's been rumours circulating for months that Red Bull were not happy with him and wanted to move him on. I don't like mid-season driver changes at the best of times unless they're absolutely necessary. Like if Nyck had actually done a Juan Pablo Montoya and just said, nah, I'm off, see you later, then fine, whatever. But I just feel like when you're a rookie, I know Nyck is a very experienced rookie, and lest we forget, he is the first ever Dutch motorsport world champion. He got his before Max did. Just to throw that one out there. I can hear all the Maserati going. Joking aside, I don't like mid-season driver changes. I think Nyck needed time to show. I think if he just continuously done this throughout the course of the season, then at the end of the season you can go, okay, well we've got some juniors that we think could do a job for us, like a Liam Lawson, like a Dennis Hauger. They could absolutely do a job for them, but instead, they've decided to go with the good PR and get Danny Rick in the car. I think it's a good opportunity for Danny to re-establish himself, because I felt sorry for him last year when he got dropped by McLaren. It was the right call, but I felt very sorry for him because I'm a big fan of Danny Rick. But yeah, I feel sorry for him. I just wonder if he was said, if you go to AlphaTauri and do a good job, we might put you in the Red Bull senior team alongside Max. I wonder if he was told that, and I think Red Bull perhaps expected a lot more from him considering how experienced he is, but Formula One is a different beast to most motorsport categories. And I think, it just didn't work out for him. And I feel very sorry for him. I do, because he seems like a nice enough guy, but it's always a shame when things like this don't work out.
And Baxley, to that point, sir, we know where nice guys finish, particularly in F1. It's not first, is it? It is last each and every single time. So go on then, Shez. Do you think that this is phase one in a replace Checo Perez, the Mexican Minister of Defense project? You expect to see Mr. Ricciardo, the honey badger, in that second Red Bull chair, as he was bloody however many years back when Max Verstappen first came into F1, 2017, 2018 maybe? Is that what you're expecting to see from this?
Yeah. I mean, but by definition, AlphaTauri is designed as a breeding ground for creating drivers that are going to go up to the senior team. So I see two possible reasons for why Danny Rick is in that seat right now. The first is that and this might be the minor reason, but the first is that he acts as a yardstick for Yuki Tsunoda, a much more reliable one. I think that's probably a big reason why Nyck de Vries is out, is because Yuki's been doing really well, but how good is he really when the guy in the other car is underperforming as much as he is? So Daniel Ricciardo will provide a much better yardstick, and we know how much Helmut Marko actually likes young drivers. So I think there's some credence in that if Yuki outperforms Daniel Ricciardo, then maybe it's his turn in the hot seat. But the second argument is that actually it's just a way to evaluate Daniel Ricciardo, who's been out of the Red Bull fold for a few seasons now and has been out of F1 completely for one season, to see how he gets on in a quick fire shootout with Yuki Tsunoda over the second half and a bit of this season. And again, Red Bull are in a fortunate position that they don't really need to worry about the second seat because Max is kind of doing everything he needs to do.
For now, Shez,
Yeah, exactly. For now,
the
for
Red
now.
Bull modus operandi. Just do it.
Just,
Nike, right?
no, I like the way you put it, window shopping. But
Mate.
but the fact that they don't need to worry about the big seat right now means that they can try out whatever they want to try out in their second team. Or as somebody else has suggested on social media, that this massive rebrand of AlphaTauri is going to become Scuderia Daniel Ricciardo, and maybe it'll be a team built around him. Although I feel that that's probably unlikely.
I mean, do we remember how Daniel Ricciardo was performing? Why he's no longer in F1? I bet people have really short memories. This F1 thing is like very Janet Jackson. What have you done for me lately? Each and every single time, and now Danny Ricciardo has gone and done a decent test. All of a sudden, he's like, nobody forgets that very young Lando Norris, had him properly undermanaged, which I think is a bit techie, lads. But I don't know. I've just read very quickly, Shez. I've just read that the Sky Sports commentators think that getting rid of Nyck de Vries is a tad premature. And you know what, fellas? I concur with that. I feel like, for me, and again, I know Nice Guys finished last, and of course he's been underperforming. But whilst we're not playing, I don't know what it feels a bit premature, Shez, man. I can't even lie to you. I just feel like it's a bit, well, you couldn't give him another 5, another 6, another 10 races even. Like, what's the rhyme or reason behind that? Just being cutthroat and cold-blooded. Aren't you Red Bull? The Bulls that are red.
Cam, I think it comes back to my opening gambit that this isn't about him being kicked out of it. This is, why was he in the seat in the first place? And I think that was an impulsive decision based on one race, essentially. Like, if you're gonna boil it down, it's one race that's decided him being in that seat. Now, you could argue, sure, that Daniel Ricciardo underperformed in McLaren against Lando Norris, but if you're talking about short memories, can we not forget how good he was at Red Bull before he decided to go to McLaren, before he decided to go to Renault? And even at Renault, he went from not retiring in his first race to getting podiums by the time he left. They were devastated when he left. They called him every name under the sun. So he's an established performer who can be a benchmark in that seat. And if you're trying to not waste time, get rid of Nyck de Vries. Red Bull are not about developing drivers. Their view of F1 is that you do all your training in the junior categories and you come into Formula One fully formed. I know that that's a flawed mentality. I know it is, but that's how they see the world. And it's worked well for them in the past with Vettel and Verstappen. So I feel like they think that that's okay. And at the time that De Vries was put in that seat, they didn't have a better alternative. Now they do, and that's why they've done what they've done. And
all right, then let me pitch this at you guys.
Yeah, go for it.
Between now and before we digress and go on to a bit of Silverstone, because it was a half decent Grand Prix, so I hear. Gun to head, between now and the end of the season, Baxty, with all the numbers on the board reset between Yuki Tsunoda in that Alpha and Danny Rick in that Alpha, who wins in that championship between the two new Alpha drivers? Baxter, I need one name, sir.
Ricciardo.
Shez, give me one name.
All right, just to be Mr.
What is it with you in this one name,
confusion,
Malarkey?
I'm going to say Tsunoda.
It's techie, isn't it? I can't pick against Tsunoda. You know what, chaps? Again, going back to my old sporting adages, you've always got to pick the young. Like if it's a straight out fight, you've got to pick the young guy that's in the prime of his career, not the bloody apex Brad Pitt type that will only win in the film, right? Like, you always odds probability, like 8-9 times out of 10, the young buck is always going to beat the old guy.
You're not saying that Nyck de Vries is is the young buck, though, are you?
No, I'm saying between Yuki and
Yeah,
Danny Rick.
yeah. So in terms of getting rid of Nick and bringing in Daniel Ricciardo,
No. So I've moved on. So I'm talking about Danny Rick versus
okay.
Yuki now. Who's gonna between now if we start them at 0 in terms of the driver championship points from Hungary, between them, who wins by the end of the season? And I think Yuki Tsunoda each and every single day of the week.
As long as he doesn't get into his own head, man. That's his only problem.
I don't think he's even going to be close, bruv. I think we'll be shocked. Yeah, it's hard to like
jump in a car in the middle of the season.
A and B. How many people, we talked about this a gazillion times before, right? F1's a cumulative exercise. It's like, you know, with your professional qualifications, Shez, you need to do continuous professional development. You need to keep up, right? There's no like coming out of the system and then coming back in. You've got to continue to learn and grow. There's no like sabbatical.
Yeah,
and I think F1 is that times a gazillion. And there's not too many. Alonso, maybe. There's not too many that go and come back better. Is what. But
the caveat to that though is how much Nyck de Vries was making Yuki look really good, right? Is it that Yuki is performing miracles in a car that is a no-hoper, or is it that he's being flattered by the fact that the other guy isn't?
I think Yuki. I think
it's just a question. It's just a question.
I think your second is on the money, Shez. I think that he has flattered to deceive as far as Nyck de Vries' underperformance. Yuki looks better than he probably is. But again, you just go back to the young, hungry lion in the ascendancy as far as his momentum, right? Absolutely. Can't pick against Yuki. Be interesting to check these back shortly. Baxty, talk to me about Silverstone. Are McLaren back? Do they need to put on the Dayglow livery back on there to symbolise their returning to the front of the grid?
I think they're in the fight for P2. Certainly, I think the P2 constructors battle has kind of all of a sudden very quietly gone from a 2-horse race between Aston and Ferrari, and then Mercedes have got themselves in there, and now McLaren are in there as well. It's going to be fascinating to watch. I think they are back towards that front end of the grid, but whether they are near at the front, I'm not entirely sure. We saw in Spain that the McLaren works very well in cooler temperatures, and Silverstone was predominantly cooler, and that kept them in that window. But the fact that they could hold off a Mercedes with 4-lap old soft tyres and a brand new set of mediums on George Russell, and they were both on the hard tyres, fair play to them. That was a epic effort by both Lando and Oscar. And yeah, I think Zach Brown and Andrea Stella, they deserve a lot of credit for turning that team around, because from where they were at the start of the season, that's some turnaround.
And who saw this coming? I just don't even genuinely, chaps. I don't even understand from where McLaren have come. It makes no sense to me. Shez, explain to me what McLaren have done. What's the key? What's the secret serum that they've been drinking?
It seems to be that they've that number one, they were delayed in whatever they were hoping to put out at the beginning of the season. So they said that by their own admission that the car that they put out in Bahrain was not the car that they wanted to. And now they're closer towards going down the development path that they wanted to be on. So number one. And second, I think what Baxty has said is absolutely correct, that the last 2 races that we've been at have worked to McLaren's strengths. Austria and Silverstone were both cooler conditions, and the McLaren seems to have a trait where it just switches on its tyres like that. Note the hard tyres after the safety car at Silverstone switched on very, very quickly against a set of used soft. So point, but and they're still upgrading the car. I think what will be interesting is when we go to Hungary and it's more constant radius corners and there's a bit more heat in the track. Will they still be there? I think they've put on a good run, but whether they can maintain that when the tracks get hotter and more conventional, I don't know. I hope they can, because I absolutely love the fact that there's 4 teams in this at the moment, but I don't know.
Here's hoping. Can we talk about Mercedes for a second, Baxty? Because we've been going back and forth about their progress, or depending on who you talk to, lack thereof. Baxter, you're hopeful about what we saw at Silverstone. Give me the case for Mercedes' progress over the last couple of races.
Yeah, I mean, I look, there's been a lot of discourse within the Mercedes fan community over the last few days. There are those that have been very negative on the team, don't feel like they're making enough progress, feel like they should just be winning again. Never going to happen. And you've got guys like me who are a bit more positive. And the positives to take from the race are that we beat both Ferraris on pace in the race. Ferrari, I think, are quicker in qualifying. And I think quali is where Mercedes, that's its Achilles heel right now, which when you've got drivers like George and Lewis, that's a bit concerning. But their race pace, phenomenal. Beat Ferrari, beat Aston Martin. Okay, the McLarens were too quick and we got lucky with the safety car to beat Oscar. But, the race pace was good. And I feel like we were competitive with all of the guys around us in the constructors, which was excellent. And a podium is a podium. I don't care how bad your weekend is. Leading up to that, you get a podium. That's such a massive confidence booster. Lewis at home, that's 13 consecutive, not consecutive, but 13 podiums at the British Grand Prix, plus another podium at Silverstone at the 70th anniversary. That record is unbelievable. So there's a lot to be hopeful for, and we know that we're working with a kind of hybrid mule car right now as well, because they can't get their full concept onto the car yet until next year. I'm confident that we're heading in the right direction. It's slow right now, but I think we're going to see the reward from that in the future.
Oh, Baxty, here's hoping, mate. I really hope that you're onto something. Shez, talk to me about Mercedes, because I think you're ever so slightly more optimistic than I also.
Yeah, I mean, I think I am. Just looking at how this season's played out so far, you've got Red Bull, who are miles ahead at the moment, and the inroads that teams are making are small, but behind them there's a revolving door of teams that are vying to be second, best of the rest, and the way I've seen this season so far is that you've had Aston have been at the front and then they've dropped back, and then Ferrari have been at the front and then they've dropped back. Now McLaren are at the front, and I don't know what they're going to do next. But throughout all of that, Mercedes have always kind of been there. And the last 4 or 5 races, especially since the upgrade has come, apart from Austria was one to forget, but they've had a nice little run of races where they've been the constant in that battle for best of the rest, and that's put them second in the constructors at the moment. And they've got Silverstone, I think, really highlighted the fact that they have poor aero efficiency. Like the way that Lando was able to hold off Lewis up towards Copse off of Luffield, you could see that Lewis had an incredible run on him. And even despite that, as soon as he pulled alongside him, there's so much drag that Lando can just pull away. If you're at a track that prioritizes straight line speed over pure downforce, that's what's going to happen. And if we're going back to tracks like Hungary, where downforce is at a premium, I think you'll start to see that Merc are back in the fight again. And that's kind of what I'm expecting to happen, that it will still be a revolving cast of different teams, but I think Mercedes will be in there or thereabouts. I don't think they're catching Red Bull this season. That's a given, though.
So here's what I got a bit frustrated about, chaps, and again, me and Shez were on the last lap, and I lost my rag when I saw the 3.9, 3.2 second pit stops that Mercedes were guilty of yet again, lads. All that other stuff that we talked about is absolutely good news. Upgrades going the right way. Lewis getting his head in the game. George kind of still has his head in the game. Seems like the team are moving in one direction as far as the design philosophy is concerned, and that absolutely is all good news. But when I saw the bloody pit stops, I was like, FFS, chaps. FFS. Not even, look, everybody makes mistakes, right? We said that initially about the slim pod concept. Everybody makes a mistake. Bloody Adrian Newey made a massive one in designing a McLaren that was too unsafe to even see the track once upon a time, right? But fellas, you can't be expecting to do these amazing design philosophy turnarounds for my money if you just can't even get the simplest of things right. Because for me, the pit stops, Ferrari had nonsense pit stops. I'm just talking purely about the execution of the pit stop. Ferrari were worse than Mercedes last year, right? They couldn't even put the tyres on. They were sitting around having committee meetings while Leclerc and bloody Sainz were double stacked. It was a joke. In the off-season, Frederick Vasseur comes in and says, all right, then listen, this is basics, hygiene factors. Let's get the reps in. And of course, you would expect as a proportion of the amount of reps and practice that we put in for pit stops, that our pit stop times will tumble. We will get quicker at them. Lo and behold, the geniuses or not geniuses at Ferrari have got something right because their pit stops have absolutely tumbled. Mercedes, we're stasis. There's no improvement. And chaps, I'll be honest, that concerns me. Although I will say this in closing before I pass to you, Shez. Baxty in our chats offline raised a really, really good point about the progress year on year, to which I responded, I don't care about the progress year on year. Last year's design philosophy was nonsense. What I'm concerned with is the progress race on race. And if we're going to put numbers to it, 86.72 seconds was the pole at the British Grand Prix. Lewis was as near as makes no difference, half a second away, which is still a big chunk. But again, it's the comparison that we're talking about. That half a second translates, because we want to do is a percentage of the lap time, right? So that half a second translates into 0.58%. So that's your delta. That's the difference between Mercedes at the British Grand Prix. And again, changeable conditions. You might want to factor that in, but let's take it at face value for now. At the Austrian Grand Prix, one race ago, no less, 64.391 was what got pole Max Verstappen. Lewis Hamilton was 0.428 seconds adrift. That's 0.66% behind. So in those terms, if you're going to take that, if they can continue improving at that rate, to Baxty's point, if they can continue closing the gap at the current rate, like give them like 10, 11, 12 races, and they'll be close, lads. They will be close. But the question is, and again, with the pit stop still front and centre of the mind, is that something that team behaving as they are, incompetence, just they reek of it? Can they continue at that same rate of growth, Shez?
So that's actually, I think, the most important point I think we can make, right? The ceiling, the technical ceiling that this car has is really, really low, because there's so many things that they can't change and so many things that they're constrained by, that they will run into the law of diminishing returns on this car very quickly. And that's why, Toto's talking about we're shifting focus onto 2024 now, because actually, how much more can they get out of this car? Probably not that much. What you're saying, and I completely agree with this, is that actually what they should be doing is switching their focus away from the technical side of things and moving more to the operational side of things and trying to get that tight by the end of this season. I was reading a book called Total Competition, and anyone out there who likes F1 should definitely read this book. It's by Adam Parr, who's the team principal at Williams a few years ago, and he's doing an entire essentially podcast in a book with Ross Brawn, and Ross Brawn talks about what they did with pit stops in the early Mercedes years, and what they talked about was that they were getting down to like sub 3 second pit stops in the races, and Ross said, in practice, in the factory we got them down to less than 2 seconds, but we built in a margin for the races. We talked about this before, but I think that is the major problem that Mercedes still have, is that they still think they're a dominant team. They need to get that mentality straight now, because they're not. And even if they are, even when they get to a point where they have a car that's 4 seconds quicker than a Red Bull, they still need to be punching in those sub 3, sub 2 second, if they can, pit stops. Now's the time to do it. When you're not concentrating on the car, get the operational side of things in order so that come 2024, there's no excuses.
Mate,
you've got plenty of time to do it.
Mate.
And I'm 100% with you on that.
This all makes sense, Shez. But again, should you expect rational, competent behaviour from a team that's been habitually and since then been habitually incompetent and irrational? Baxty, talk to me, bruv. Tell me what you think about those Delta times, and tell me what you think about what Shez has just countered with.
So the Delta times are encouraging, because one of the big things and the discussions I was having yesterday was that the new front wing upgrade didn't bring anything to the car, and clearly it's given us a couple of, just little 0.01ers to chip away at Red Bull. Considering that we do have this kind of W13, W15 hybrid on the car right now, which is the W14B. In regard to pit stops, you said something in a Twitter space I ran the other day, which summed it up perfectly. Fix what you can fix now, whilst also focusing on the car. I've just had a look at the pit stop stats for this year. If you don't know, there's actually a pit stop award for the best pit stop crew across the year. As it currently stands, on the 11th of July, just post Silverstone, Mercedes are currently 7th. Of those teams fighting for P2, they are the worst. Aston are 6th, McLaren are 3rd, Ferrari are 2nd. They're also behind AlphaTauri and Alpine.
Oh my God.
That's not good enough. The standard set this year is
bad.
2.5 or sub.
That's right.
Anything below 2.5. Mercedes have done that once in 2023. And that was in the first race of the season. And it was at like a 2.49.
Serial underperformers, Baxty. Yeah. It's almost like, not to draw out an analogy that doesn't fit, but it's almost like, when people are talking about Max's Sector 3, how it just felt sometimes he feels inevitable. This is like like that brilliant inevitability. It's almost like the inverse with Mercedes, with the pit stops in particular. When we were watching live, it just felt like, when I saw 3.9, I felt outraged. And then, and you just knew that the second one was also going to be 3 seconds with Gordich. I was like, this is going to be greater or equal to 3 seconds. It has to be. And
what I would say is the 3.2 for Lewis wasn't so much of an issue because it came under a safety car. And actually, Mercedes played the safety car game really well, because they were like, VSC, let's play for a safety car. And that's what got them the podium. So the 3.2 wasn't so much of an issue. It was the 3.9 for me that was such a huge error, because it put George behind Leclerc. If they'd had a quicker one, he would have got ahead of him.
Yeah, I mean, of our three things that make up a successful Formula One team, if you go back to technical strategy and operations, at the moment, Mercedes are improving on the technical aspect of it, and strategy is sort of getting there. They're making better calls that you can understand. The operational side of things is the thing that they need to work on, and it's a weird paradox with F1 that the quicker your car is, the less interested you are in the pit stops. There was if you go back to when Mercedes were absolutely dominating, the thing that teams that like Williams were doing and McLaren were doing, you were finding that they were the ones that had the quickest pit stops. It was stuff like Sam Michael had joined in sort of 2010, 2011 at Williams. And one of the first things that he did, sorry, not at Williams, at McLaren, when they were starting to have their drop back, and one of the first things that he did was to get their pit stops in order, because, like you said, it's something you can fix right now.
Quick,
do it. This is the time to do it.
Low hanging fruit time.
100% agree with that.
What Red Bull did. Red Bull have won the last 5 DHL awards. Like, since 2018, it's just been Red Bull. And they're probably going to win it again this year as well.
Inevitable, Baxty.
It is. It's guerrilla. It's a guerrilla
They're about
mentality.
60 points ahead of Ferrari or something, and like
they're just excellent. It makes me sick, chaps, how good they are. They don't miss a beat, or very, very rarely right.
But
Very,
they've
very
built up
rarely.
to this though, haven't they? In that they've had that guerrilla mentality where they have to get all of these tiny little things absolutely right. And they've not lost that. And now they're in a position where they have a dominant car and they've got all of the other stuff on board. They are untouchable. And that's what Mercedes need to be aiming for.
Oh, they're very good, our Red Bull, aren't they? Very, very good. I don't even know where else to go after that, chaps. I feel like I feel like I've spent. There is another topic that I did want to cover that I have missed. Oh, let's talk about McLaren drivers very quickly, because I think they're worthy of some praise, man. I've always rated Lando very highly, but back-to-back races, he's kind of starting to show and prove a case. So there was Sochi a couple of years back, whether you blame that on the team or him being a little bit stubborn and a bit of a young driver, a bit naive, whatever. That's in the past now. I feel like Lando's becoming the driver who we always hoped he could be. Piastri too as well, right, Baxty?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hadn't seen too much of Piastri before this season, but I know Shez is a big Piastri guy, and first few races, okay, Saudi Arabia, he was excellent and kind of got undone by an unfortunate incident on lap one, but he was kind of struggling a little bit, not finding his feet. But he seems to have found his feet now, and he's settled down really well. And I think this was Oscar starting to justify the hype around him and why he's so highly rated and why McLaren fought so hard to get him as well, in that contract battle. And I think Lando's actually relishing being a team leader. I think, having basically kicked Daniel's ass for 2 years, he feels like he belongs. Okay, Daniel was the one who got the win in 21, but Daniel had a very, very strong weekend that weekend, and I think Lando probably would have won in Sochi, but had the rain not come, and also had he played it better. But I think he's relishing being a team leader. My advice to Lando is, if Red Bull come calling, do not go anywhere near them. Be the team leader. You're already there. Don't go and put yourself in that environment.
Yeah.
Just don't do it. Because I know Red Bull are interested. They want him, but they're not going to back him. They're going to back Max every time, which is understandable. Just either wait for a Mercedes or a Ferrari or something, but do not touch Red Bull with a barge pole.
Love it.
Baxter, another conversation for another day. Methinks with that, I'd agree with you. It feels like Lando he's growing into his race suit, isn't he? I think this is like him starting to walk the path. I rate it highly. Go on then, Shez. Give me some. Talk to me about how you told me so about Oscar Piastri.
None of that. I wouldn't do it to you. But I really enjoyed this weekend was Karun Chandhok side by side of Piastri and Lando's qualifying Q3 laps, and I thought actually it really exemplified what Lando's really good at. He's super precise at getting the front end in to the apex, but as close to the apex as absolutely possible. And I think he was probably helped a little bit because he had the new front wing on his car this weekend, but it was just boom, boom, boom every single time, every apex. He absolutely nails it, and it just gives him a perfect rotation into the next part of the corner. And even Oscar was sitting there sort of going, wow, that was just Orlando. That's really good. I wasn't able to do that. But on Oscar, what I would say is he is doing currently what all the really, really great drivers do, which is when the car comes good, they make really, really good use of it. Like, we complain about Max being a bit of a car merchant, but actually the Checo comparison is always valid because he's able to do things with that car that Checo is not able to do. And Piastri is now starting to show that in a car that is capable of doing things. I mean, the paradigm shift between what he did without the upgrade in Austria and what he did with the upgrade in Silverstone, it was night and day. And that's what the great drivers do. You give them something to work with and they paint you a masterpiece. That's what he's starting to show that he can do. And I hope that he continues to do it.
Love that, Shez. and can't, as much as I want to disagree, I can't, mate. You've summed that up very nicely around Oscar and Lando. Although I will say, like, Debbie Downer time for Lando, mate. He didn't he used to like live at Silverstone pretty much. Of course, he should be hitting those bloody apexes and gobbling up those
But he
curves.
was doing it in Austria as well. He did it in Austria.
No, but so I think the real test will come A, when Oscar gets exactly the same amount of upgrades on his car, and B, when we're not at a track called Austria or Silverstone, around which Lando Norris, one is his home track, and he's bloody pretty much cut his teeth around there, and the other one being Austria just somehow appears to be like Harry Potter around there. He's just genius, right? So let's have a look at. We'll see the.
So I think this is the spiciest combo on the grid.
I've got a sneaky suspicion that Oscar will be looking at Hungary like, all right then, Nando, how about when we get to Austria? Let's see if your chest is still pumped up like that, if you're still as confident and bullshy. Because I reckon, cheeky bet, I reckon Oscar might fancy his chances around Hungary.
Did you guys catch the little social media thing that Zach Brown did with both his drivers either side of him when he was like, "Oh, congrats!" and you fans are all the greatest, and he did a little thing, and
I find all that stuff super cringy, Shez. I'm not.
But I found the body language interesting, because obviously Lando had just got a podium, right, and Oscar hadn't, and Oscar's body language in that video was exactly what you're saying. It was basically, I was robbed of a podium, and it's my time. My time is coming. So just watch this space. See it.
See you in Hungary, Lando.
Yeah. If the car allows.
Yeah, let's see it, Noah. Let's see how we get on. I feel like Oscar might have the beating of Lando at tracks not named Silverstone and the Red Bull Ring. But anyway, I digress, chaps. That has been a really good episode, man. It's been a privilege to catch up with the Three Musketeers proper. But we'll have to. I'm going to be away for a couple of weeks soon, but we'll try and get a couple of episodes in. Meantime, between time, for co-host Shez, for co-host Baxty, at ShezMed, at Baxty B, Baxty BF1 on YouTube's respectively. I've been your boy Cameron. Do me a favour, remember to look but never stare. Also remember to scroll to the top and leave a 5-star review if you are listening on a podcasting platform. YouTube's like, comment, subscribe, share with esteemed colleagues, grizzled F1 scribe friends, if indeed you're lucky to have them. Between now and next time, remember to look but never stare.